As I reported here before, the co-receivers meticulously sifted through all of Alex's assets that they could find, and once they had as complete a number as they could come up with, they notified the court and set up a process for any of Alex's victims to come forward and claim their share. It's a very complex setup that I explained in a previous podcast that I'll pin in comments. But October was the deadline to put in the claims. November was the process for the money to be fairly divided, with payouts likely to be in the next few days, or if there are issues that need to be settled, January. It's not much money, just slightly over $1.5 million, and that's before the fees come out for the special court-appointed referee to determine who gets what. I have the claims of all the claimants and their supporting documents for you today. This episode is mostly going to focus on Alex's brother Randy's claim, so grab your pearls because we're going to be clutching them. Let's get started. This is Legal Updates with Cassidy. Murdaugh Machinations, brother Randy, among those who submitted claims for the last of Alex's money. Welcome. I've mentioned before how in the time between the boat crash and the murders, Alex laundered more money than ever before. He did this through Cousin Eddie and now claims that it was for drugs. And don't get me wrong, I believe there were drugs. There were obviously drugs. I just don't believe that they were anywhere near the amount of drugs that he claims, for several reasons, some of which I've mentioned before, but again, I'm by no means an expert on that, so I'll just leave it there. Alex knew the boat crash trial was coming up, and I think he was stashing cash that couldn't be traced because he knew they were going to be financially strapped by that case. I've shown this in a previous podcast, but let's go through it again. From October 8, 2019 to May 28, 2021, Alex issues 17 cashier's checks from Fake Forge to Cousin Eddie, Curtis Smith, totaling $164,748.76. And then from the personal account that he had already transferred some of the laundered settlement money to, he writes 254 personal checks to Cousin Eddie, totaling $1,825,560.95. Almost $2 million in 20 months. Alex was in a hot rush to make us all believe that he had a drug addiction and that that's where all his money went. He wanted us to think it occurred over a large span of time, yet his transactions with Cousin Eddie were only within this 20-month period. It's simply impossible that he spent almost $2 million in less than 2 years on Oxy, in my opinion and in many others' opinions. Also in my opinion, something much bigger was happening with this money that has yet to be uncovered. That gets me every time. But in addition to all of that, it came out during the murder trial that he was frequently using Nathan Tuten to cash checks as well.
Did you have an opportunity or an occasion, or multiple occasions, to do running for Alex?
Yes, sir.
All right. And this would be before the murder?
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about what Alex would have you do.
If I needed to pick up court documents from different law firms or courthouses, drive them depositions, cash checks, some of the things.
I'm sorry, you said cash checks?
That's correct.
He had you cash checks for him?
That's correct.
All right, well tell me, where would he send you to cash the checks?
Palmetto State Bank.
Okay. What were your instructions for that?
Cash a check.
And what would you do with the money?
Take it back to his office. And
like cash?
that's correct.
Is it in an envelope or are you just holding it?
It was in a Palmetto State envelope.
Okay. And you would take that envelope of cash, and where would you bring it?
Back to his office.
Okay, and just hand it to him.
That's correct.
How many times did he have you cash checks like that?
Very frequently.
Very frequent?
That's correct.
Many times?
Many times.
Was there ever a time when you cashed that check and there was a room full of, has there ever been a time where you cashed the check, brought it back to Alex's office, and there was someone in his office?
That's correct.
Multiple people, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
Tell us who those folks were that you would have been there when Alex is sending you to get cash, you're coming back with the cash, and there's someone sitting in his office.
There was different occasions. One particular occasion was Greg Alexander.
Who's he?
I believe he's the chief of police for the embassy.
Okay.
Corey Fleming.
Do you know Corey Fleming?
I do.
And what is he? What did he do?
He was an attorney as well.
Okay.
And Michelle's best friend.
Okay. And who else?
And Chris Wilson.
And do you know who Chris Wilson is?
I do.
Who is he?
He's an attorney in Bamberg, I believe.
When did Alex stop asking you to cash checks? What was the time frame?
I believe it was a few weeks before the murders. So
a few weeks. You've been doing this a lot, and a few weeks before the murder, he doesn't ask you to cash any more checks.
That's correct.
The interesting part is in both cases, he stopped check cashing shortly before the murders. As far as I could find, but I didn't get to deep dive that, I didn't find where anyone tracked the checks that were cashed by Nathan Tuten. I never heard any follow-up to that on amounts or copies of those checks, and I really don't understand why. Unless it became part of a bigger investigation. The bottom line is, though, the larger portion of money available to him between the boat crash and his arrest was turned to cash. It doesn't take much imagination to figure out why, but in the end, after searching for over a year and selling off all of the assets available, only a little over $1.5 million is left for the remaining victims. The list of victims is long, so I expected the list of those filing claims would be long too, but it's surprisingly short, and it's surprising to see who's on it and who's not on it. I have my little bound book of names here in the order that the claims were filed. I thought this would be for those who had not received compensation, or those who had not received a fair amount of compensation, but I guess everyone's idea of fair is different. I do have to bite my tongue a lot here, so I don't get myself in trouble, but you're all welcome to speak your minds in comments, because, well, some of the saddest stories of the victims are not on this list. And the ones who received the most compensation, or who didn't need compensation as much as some of the other victims, were among the very first. In fact, the first two names surprised me, to be honest. They are Brian Harriet and Tony Satterfield. I'm going to put them at the end, and maybe you'll understand why by the time I get to them. But after Brian and Tony are the Plyler sisters. My first victim video was about them because they are Alex's first known victims. I'm linking their story in comments, but their story is quite sad. They were in the car when their mom had an accident due to the tires on their vehicle. They went off the road and struck a tree. The girls were both in the back seat and saw their mother and older brother, who was in the front passenger seat, die. Elenia was pinned, so the youngest, Hannah, had to go up to the interstate and flag down a truck driver to help them. Alex won a large settlement for them, and because they were minors, he appointed his accomplice, Russell Lafitte, as their conservator. Something that, come to find out, is against bank policy at Palmetto State Bank. Russell charged exorbitant fees for a job he didn't do. For Elenia alone, he charged $145,029.37. He was supposed to be the protector of their money, but he did no such thing. Using the legal formula set up by the South Carolina Supreme Court in 2009, their attorney adds a 7% interest rate, which would be $154,730.80 and adds that Elenia would be entitled to treble damages, or triple, in accordance with the South Carolina Unfair Trade Practices Act, which would bring it up to $1,258,992.71. Or, if Alex was found guilty of breaches of fiduciary duties, Elenia would be entitled to punitive damage, which would be up to almost $1.5 million itself. We do know that Alex's law firm, Russell Laffitte, and Palmetto State Bank have settled with both girls, but their attorney, Eric Bland, has kept their settlement amounts confidential. So in this case, we have no idea how much or how little she has received to this point. Her sister Hannah's claim is a little more complicated because she's the younger one whose money was available longer because they had until she was 18 to hand over her settlement. So it was her funds that Russell and Alex helped themselves to, and the one whose funds were borrowed from without permission or knowledge by her or the probate court. It started with this false document claiming she was a resident of Hampton. How a judge signed off on this is a bigger question, since we clearly see her address listed as Columbia, South Carolina. And I can't help but wonder why we have yet to see a single judge being held responsible for the role they played in all of this mess, though multiple judges were involved. In carrying out these loans to Alex, Russell put Hannah's money at great risk because Alex was not in a financially stable condition, and as it turned out, was in fact unable to pay it back with his own funds. It was these loans, in fact, that sent Alex down his path of stealing from clients. As Hannah got closer to the age of 18, both Alex and Russell had to find ways to put the money back so that it wasn't noticed by probate court when the time came to give her her settlement. In total, 14 loans were made, 8 of which were documented. But even those that were documented were not documented correctly according to bank policy. 6 of these loans weren't documented at all. Though Russell charged Hannah a very high interest rate of 21.371% for a loan for her, his loans to Alex were far below the norm, if anything at all. Not to mention that allowing loans with her money was a major breach of fiduciary duties, the duties that he paid himself handsomely to do, but didn't. So Attorney Bland calls for money owed in interest of over $66,000, and because Alex never repaid his loans on time, but was never charged a late fee, he seeks an additional $26,000 for late fees. Now we have to include the inflated conservator fees that Russell Laffitte charged. And again, my question, why did a judge sign off on these ridiculous amounts? Then we move on to the unfair trade practices, which under South Carolina law allows triple, which would bring her total to $867,827.35. Or, if they went the route of punitive damages, the total would be $1,033,127.80. Again, like Elenia, Hannah has already won a settlement, but Eric does not make the settlement amounts public. And of course, we have to consider that these are amounts that they could ask for, but not necessarily what a court would award. But with these girls started Alex's long line of stealing. Since he had to pay these loans back, he stole first from the Pinckney family and the Badger family. It was his rush to restore Hannah Plyler's account that really started it all. Hannah Plyler was the only victim Alex and his accomplices ever paid back in full. The next few names are where I really have to bite my tongue. The fifth in line to file was Alex's own brother, Randy. And an interesting side note that I've mentioned before, we heard in the plea hearings, Alex gave an Alford plea for this indictment. For those of you who didn't see that podcast, an Alford plea is not exactly pleading guilty, but recognizing that if the case went to trial, there would be enough evidence for a guilty verdict to be likely. He's not saying he's guilty. He's saying the court would most likely find him guilty. I don't know how this makes sense when there is a confession of judgment, which is in fact a confession of guilt. But I stopped trying to understand the Murdaughs a long time ago. Randy filed this complaint very quickly after Alex's thievery became known. In fact, just 2 weeks to the day after the arrest. Randy's claim is based on 2 checks that were written as loans to Alex. One was for $75,000 and the other for $13,000 that went to the place where Alex detoxed in Florida. These are Exhibits 1 and 2 of this table. There are some further details to break down for this, and in this lovely little table and in the receipts in his claim, we see that some equipment was sold to cancel part of the debt. We're going to look at calendars today for the sake of establishing timelines. Alex was arrested on Thursday, October 14th of 2021 for the first 2 felony counts. This is long before any murder arrests. These were simply financial crime arrests. Those first 2 counts were obtaining property under false pretenses in the Satterfield matter. And the arrest was made immediately upon his release from detox in Orlando. 2 days later, he was booked into the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center, which is where the infamous jail phone calls with his family took place. 3 days later, on the 19th of October, Alex is denied bond pending psychiatric evaluation, and Dick is just flabbergasted that the focus is on Alex.
In court earlier, you kind of said that Fleming was more to blame and Murdaugh didn't really have much knowledge.
Alex was not the lawyer. Fleming was the lawyer. He said, if that truck ran out with you this afternoon and you hired a lawyer, the lawyer's to look out for you. And if the lawyer gave the money to the truck driver, the lawyer's at fault. Now, certainly, Alex is not denying that if that happened, that he bears some responsibility, but Bland and those guys have already settled the case with Corey Fleming. It's amazing to us that the focus is on just Alex. There are other people who have participated in this process.
They already settled with Corey, he says. Why is the focus on Alex? Well, sir, because Alex is the one that ran off with the millions of dollars. How do you not see this? 3 days later, on Friday, October 22nd, Mark Tinsley asks the court for Alex's assets to be frozen. Why? Because the family is selling stuff off and moving stuff around. Thursday the 28th, exactly 2 weeks after Alex's arrest, his brother Randy files this suit against him, as I mentioned, for $90,000, minus for a tractor and a rotary cutter that have been given in exchange for part of the debt. As I mentioned in my last podcast, Alex was very quick to sign a confession of judgment for his brother based on this claim. In fact, he signed it the very next day, October 29th. On November 1st, Mark Tinsley filed a supplemental memoranda for his motion to freeze Alex's assets because of this lawsuit and the one that we're going to consider next. Alex's money was locked down by emergency order on November 2nd, 2021, when the court granted the motion. This date is sometimes reported to be November 4th, 2021, because when it was granted on November 2nd, a formal order was requested by the court, and that was officially filed on November 4th. And this is also when the co-receivers Lay and McCoy officially took their roles, but the court actually granted it on the 2nd. So the money for Randy's claim, even though Alex had signed his confession of judgment, the money was never collected by Randy. Now let's go through the details of how that happened. It starts in September where Buster is granted power of attorney on the 16th. 1 week later, in his first move in his new role as power of attorney, he satisfies a mortgage. Now, everything I saw listed this property as a 42-acre property spanning across Hampton and Colleton counties. And I thought, this sounds like Moselle, but it's too small to be Moselle. And if it were Moselle, wouldn't everyone just be saying Moselle? Which made me think it must not be Moselle, because literally every news outlet I found just called it a 42-acre property in both Hampton and Colleton counties. So I set out to find out which property this was. So after a little digging, I found receipts of this satisfaction of mortgage, and I compared the details with that now infamous sale where Alex sold Moselle to Maggie for $5 and love and affection. Also, the sale of Moselle in March of this year. And guess what? It's Moselle. The first tract of land in the property commonly known as the Moselle property, that tract is 42 acres. But there are 8 tracts of land in total to this sale. So as it often happens in journalism, the first person to report is thereafter quoted without the subject being further researched. So if the first person missed it, everyone thereafter misses it too. And so this property and its description is misnamed. It should read, Buster satisfies the mortgage of Moselle. But let's think about this for a moment. Isn't this strange? All of this that's happening in September. And just look at this calendar. It starts off with the bang. On the 2nd, PMPED discovers fake forge. The very next day, they notify SLED of Alex's criminal behavior. The very next day is the Salkehatchie Road shooting. Then on the 6th, Alec goes into rehab. The day after that, he gets barred from the solicitor's office, and PMPED issues a formal statement about Alex stealing. And on the 8th, his law license is suspended by the South Carolina Supreme Court. On the 13th, SLED confirms that they're investigating Alex for misappropriation of funds. Cousin Eddie gets charged on the 14th. On the 15th, SLED opens an investigation into the death of Gloria Satterfield, and her sons file a suit against Alex, Corey's law firm, Palmetto State Bank, and Chad Westendorf. That's just half the month. On the 16th, Alex turns himself in for both insurance fraud and the false police report. It's almost every day something huge is happening this month. Then on the 20th, Connor Cook files suit for the campaign to blame him for the boat crash. On the 21st, Alex's insurance refuses to cover the boat crash because it wasn't within the terms of his policy. With all of this stuff brewing, with all of Alex's properties, he had Island property, he had Edisto property. With all of this happening, his first move is to get Moselle paid off. The place where his wife and son were brutally murdered. Why? Who would want such a piece of property? Even weirder still, because Alex wouldn't even stay there after the murders. Why, oh why, did he want this land paid off ahead of everything else? Conspiracy theories engaged. Now at this point, he's not even been charged for murder. At this point, he no doubt feels quite a bit of hope that he can smooth all of this out somehow. But of all the things he wants to save, for that day when it's all smoothed out, he saves Moselle. But in spite of all these efforts, Moselle in its entirety was sold in March of this year. The house has been fixed up a little, tracts of land have been divided, and the house portion of the property was put back up on the market last month. But anyway, with this shady stuff like Buster coming up and satisfying a mortgage and things being sold to his brothers, and footage of John, Marvin, and Buster coming out of the house with guns and loading things up in a truck, it prompted this motion to be filed to specifically freeze Alex's assets. Now, this motion had been filed but not yet ruled on in court. They all had copies of this motion. They knew that it was before the court, and they knew that the court was likely going to grant this motion. We hear conversations about this in the jailhouse calls. And so here's where we see those sneaky Murdaugh machinations in play. Get as many of the assets sold as possible. Get as much money for the assets as possible. Now, this motion is going to be heard in court on October 29th, 2021. So what do Alex and Randy do? Following close of business, the day before the hearing, knowing that it won't be seen until the next day, he files his summons and complaint. See the time here? So the hearing's held on October 29th, and after that hearing is held, again, late in day, 4:33 p.m., Alex files a confession of judgment for Randy's suit, which is exactly what it sounds like. He's confessing before the court that he's guilty as charged, and so this would be an easy win for Randy to collect if it's accepted by the court. October 29th is a Friday, so Friday at 4:33 p.m., they put this into play, pretty much the last minute before the weekend, thinking that they're securing the bag. Then Monday morning, November 1st, they sneak in a partial satisfaction of judgment that's dated October 29th. But on November 2nd, the court grants the motion to freeze Alex's assets, and the order is officially filed on November 4th, as I mentioned, when they hand over control of them to Lay and McCoy. Also on November 4th, Randy files a correction to the amount for these bills of sale because in their haste to get them on file, they wrote for $2,000 too much. But that's not all. This partial satisfaction of judgment is based, as I mentioned earlier, on the sale of a tractor and a bush hog that they've so conveniently supplied their receipts for as evidence. But look at this. The actual bills of sale for these two items are listed as October the 5th. You can plainly see it on each of these bills of sale. We can see the details are filled in. We see Buster signing as attorney in fact. But then when we look at the actual claim, the date of the sale is October 15th. How are these dates off by 10 days? It makes the whole thing, which is already suspicious and sneaky, seem even more off. I wonder as well whether Randy still even has these machines, or if it was simply a quick sale to get the money squared away before it was taken over by the court, and then they'd have the time to turn around and sell it at their leisure, instead of trying to quickly find a buyer before this date. So basically, they saw this hearing coming. They saw the likely outcome of the motion being granted. They throw together a suit, the last moment. Alex throws together this confession at the last moment, and they hoped it wouldn't be noticed. But of course it was, because here we are. Either way, they thought they were securing Randy's money. They were trying to pull yet another fast one, this time on the court. It did not turn out that way, though, once the court order came through. This order is so very thorough. Starts out with a long list of what's to be considered Alex's assets, things we'd expect like property, inheritances, stocks, mortgages, and so on. We think this list will be enough. It seems to cover everything. But when you're dealing with people who find sneaky workarounds to secure their money and don't mind cheating victims again to accomplish it, the court needed even more words. So it goes on with further descriptions, even including things that don't exist yet, like publication rights, contract rights, anything that may be monetized, his image, his likeness, whether it's presently owned, previously owned, or going to be controlled in the future. And the last sentence there, any and all assets transferred, concealed, hidden, sold, encumbered, or otherwise disposed of, which previously were owned, held, or controlled by Alex Murdaugh, directly or indirectly, and in whole or in part. What a mouthful. And then the court gives their reason for such a detailed order. They said this court finds that irreparable injury, loss, or damage will result to plaintiff, and the plaintiff in this case, remember, is Renee Beach, in the absence of a temporary injunction prohibiting each of defendant Alex Murdaugh and defendant Buster Murdaugh from hiding, concealing, misappropriating, selling, encumbering, transferring, impairing the value of, and otherwise disposing of any of the Alex Murdaugh assets and any of the Buster Murdaugh assets. So the court recognizes that these assets are in real danger and need protecting. Like I mentioned before, there were jailhouse conversations where Alex kept bringing up the sale of certain things and the rush to do it before everything was frozen, telling his brothers and Buster that this motion to freeze his assets was impending. And coming back to this tractor and this bush hog, if these were things Randy actually needed, I'm sure he could have bought them for himself. Perhaps he even already owned these. But this tractor was one of the few things that Alex owned unencumbered that still had a high value that Randy could later sell to get his money back. Remember that video of John, Marvin, and Buster collecting guns from the house? At first, people wondered if it was a way to hide the murder weapons. But no, think about the value of those guns. Those were fast, easy sells that could bring a lot of money. So there was a definite collective effort to get the most out of Alex's assets before they got taken for his victims. Except, of course, for Randy. Again, this goes directly in opposition to what he said in his sentence hearing. He wasn't right from the outset, remorseful, wanting to make it right. Right here, at the outset, what's he doing? He's trying to hide his assets. Some for his brother, some for himself, some for Buster. So it's because of all of these things that were happening right there in September, right away, that this order was absolutely necessary in the court's eyes. Then it goes on to describe the broad authority that the court gives these co-receivers. I've done a couple of podcasts about the money and the assets that they were able to come up with, and they were able to do that by the power that was given to them in this document. And we can see by the words that were used, they were granted every legal right to do whatever was necessary to hunt all of the assets down. And they sure did. And again with this too, if you skim through and notice these words, they were prepared for anything and everything that might be found and given every bit of authority to claim it all. But here is where I wonder how this tractor and tool slipped through the cracks. One of the things they were going to do was attempt to identify all Alex Murdaugh assets already transferred by him to another person, including but not limited to the Buster Murdaugh assets, and recover possession, custody, control, and title to such assets for potential administration. So anything that had already been transferred was supposed to be recovered. All the stuff that was smuggled out and sold was supposed to be returned and added to his total assets. I bet a lot of things were never recovered for this, but this tractor sale is still being applied toward Alex's debt to Randy somehow. And again, I don't understand how, because to me it goes directly against what this document says. But anyway, after this order, we don't hear anything for a long while, because during this time, the co-receivers were doing their job, tracking everything down, selling properties, negotiating things. Then we see this lien that's against some of Alex's real estate property that's described as the Murdaugh and Bennett tracts in Hampton County, and a share of timber proceeds for timber that was cut from these tracts from 2021 to 2023. Now we see it here in this partial release of confession of judgment. Now on the court website, there's no record of this document ever being filed under Randy's case, and the signature page is not included in this exhibit, so I'm assuming that it was never actually filed since the court had already granted the motion to freeze Alex's assets. Randy does say in this document that though he and the co-receivers disagree on the validity of the confession of judgment, that he does release any interest that might have resulted from the confession of judgment, but he maintains that he holds a lien on their timber sale from this property. And it goes on to mention a sales agreement between Alex and Cullum Sawmill sometime in 2022. Now this land is complicated because it's owned by multiple people. Alex's father owned half. The other half was co-owned by Randy, Alex, and John Marvin. But it's not just land. It's land for harvesting its timber. Now at the bottom of this document, we do see Randy's initials and it's dated November 4th, 2022. So I took that date to help me figure out what was going on in court documents around that time. And we find out what is happening. On November 16th, 2 weeks after this document of Randy's that was never filed in court, the co-receivers file a motion asking the court to approve the sale of timber from this property that's owned by Alex and his other family members. Now, Alex's portion is 1/6. His portion would gross $50,000 and net after all expenses paid $17,000, and that $17,000 should go into the fund that they're collecting for Alex's victims. 6 days later, on November 22nd, 2022, the court approves this motion and files an order for the sale. Now, in Randy's claim, one of his exhibits, Exhibit 10, shows the total sales from January and February of this year, and then they're broken down as half interest to Randolph III's estate, and the other half is divided into thirds, with Randy, John Marvin, and instead of Alex, the co-receivers. Exhibit 11 shows the sales from March and April, along with copies of the checks that were written to Randy, John Marvin, and Randolph III's estate. So, in spite of the co-receivers disagreeing with Randy's claim, he wants to exercise what he feels is his right to apply a lien to this timber sale as a way of getting paid back by Alex. Now, this will be something decided upon by the co-receivers and the referee in this matter. So we'll have to wait to see what they decide to do about this confession of judgment and ultimately this means of paying Randy back through the timber sale. So again, to sum this up, a motion was filed to freeze Alex's assets. Alex knew it was coming. He told his brothers it was coming. He told Buster it was coming. But it started before that, actually. Alex gets in trouble. His brother Randy's the first one to file a claim. Very next day, Alex confesses to it. They think they're going to get this all resolved. They're running out of time. So there's this sale on the 5th or the 15th, who knows, to try to cover some of that money. Court says, no, you can't do this. But here's this other chance with this timber sale. Oh, if I use some of this, it can cancel some of my debt. So instead of taking that money from the timber sale and applying it toward Alex's assets to pay his other victims, pay me back. I'm just a millionaire. But what's really sad to me is him being a high-earning lawyer with privilege and a huge inheritance, but he's still trying to find ways to get back money he lost rather than just letting it go to someone who needs it more. This was his brother that he stood by, that he went on national TV and spoke to defend, that he sat in court to support, that he was a partner in the firm where Alex was getting away with all of this stealing. How does someone in that position line themselves up, fifth in line, with his hand held out to make a claim against Alex, when Alex won't even acknowledge his guilt in this matter, but instead has chosen to file an Alford plea? It boggles the mind, especially knowing that there are others out there not in a position like Randy. They don't have huge inheritances coming. They don't have a high-earning job. They weren't born into privilege. There are people, like I said, I was shocked to see they didn't file, who I feel deserved more. There are some you'll find that never got a penny, stories that are sadder than anything Randy went through. But here he is, with his hand out, number 5. In a short list of claims. And I feel ashamed for him, and I feel embarrassed for him. There's only $1.5 million left. He could easily earn more than that in a year. It's shameful, in my opinion. But we're going to stop here. In our next episode, we're going to continue with these claims, with the next in line being PMPED themselves and John Parker, another partner in PMPED, along with some other names you'll recognize. Until then, this is Cassidy O'Connell saying stay well and stay tuned.